Hey, faithful politics listeners and viewers, if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and joined by your faithful host, Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. How are you, Will?
Great. And this week, we have with us Kevin Roberts, who is a former college professor and current president of the Heritage Foundation, which is America's most influential policy organization. Dr. Roberts has spent his career learning, educating, and taking decisive action for a brighter America. He's also the host of the Kevin Roberts Show, which is a weekly rallying cry for lovers of freedom everywhere, packed with his in-depth analysis on the issues of the day and deep conversations with movers and shakers of American politics and culture. So, welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks, Will and Josh, for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, yes. I want to apologize in advance to our listeners if you happen to hear like a tapping sound in the background or like the sound of a bird. It's because I have this bird feeder mounted to my window in my office, and I didn't realize how hungry the birds in my community were. And they are just coming in force, and they take like the little seeds and they like bang it against like the little bird feeder. So I apologize. It shouldn't be that excessive, but I want to preface that. Before we get started, so how does one become the president of the Heritage Foundation?
A lot of dumb luck. I'm the seventh president of the organization, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year in 2023. Making us one of the oldest and perhaps the largest right-of-center public policy organizations in the world. And so very briefly, the way I became president of the Heritage Foundation is prior to being head of it, I was running a state-based group, in fact, the largest state-based group modeled off of Heritage, the Texas Public Policy Foundation. That was important, focused on state legislative work, but probably what was equally important was my career as an academic, as an early American historian. I founded a K-12 Catholic school in my hometown in Louisiana, was president of Wyoming Catholic College, got involved in politics and policy, as I'm sure we'll discuss. And so here I am. I was minding my business in Texas a year and a half ago when Heritage called and asked, would you consider doing this? And my first response was no, because I, as an adopted Texan, I was happy at home with my wife and 4 kids, but it's Heritage. So the answer ultimately was yes. And it's a great privilege to do what I do every day. I look forward to doing it for a long time.
Yeah. And you are following after Casey James, who was the previous Heritage. And I didn't realize this. So she's African-American. She's a woman, and like one of the things that I hope we try to accomplish with this podcast is breaking sort of these stereotypical norms that people think about certain groups. So her being a African-American female seems like a pretty big deal for Heritage, was it?
It was huge. Kay Coles James, who is just one of the gentle ladies of our career, of our generation rather, a real hero, a real patriot, has broken a lot of barriers her entire career. She's now Secretary of the Commonwealth of Virginia for the second time, serving Governor Youngkin and the people of Virginia very well. Kay is conservative, and I won't say but, and she gets along with everyone. And I think she has a certain elegance that is the most important thing about her. But to your point, especially given her generation, she's in her 70s, she had to deal with a lot of stuff as she was coming up as a young conservative, and always handled that with aplomb. And it is a great privilege to succeed her and all of my predecessors, Senator Jim DeMint, who was president of Heritage before Kay, Ed Fulner, president and co-founder of Heritage. He was president for many years, still on our board and a great friend. All of these people, including Kay, are great friends and mentors and really important at this thing that underlies your point, Will. And it is, in spite of our immutable characteristics, skin color, other aspects of being human, the most important thing, in spite of those differences, political differences, is to put a smile on our face and recognize that we're all humans, we're all Americans, and we ought to be able to find some common ground. That's what Kay in particular is very good at.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool to hear. I love that we're able to be here, Kevin, and be able to interview you. I'm a big fan of the Heritage Foundation. I've used the Constitution Guide quite a bit. It's very comprehensive, and I love it. So I know one of your policy areas that you're very passionate about is education. And what kind of explain that a little bit to us, and even bringing in how your educational background prepared you or even motivated you to make this like one of the priorities in your thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for that question. When I was asked a year plus ago when I started at Heritage what my top three policy priorities were, I said education, education, education. And and part of that is because that's been my career. I'm a fifth generation educator in my extended family. And also because as education goes the republic. And then secondly, it's also something that knows no partisan boundaries, right? At least it ought not to. And as y'all have discussed it in other episodes of your podcast. But the third thing is not to be dramatic or create a false sense of urgency, both things I really try not to do. But from this kid, from a working class family, single parent family, I only went to public schools. And so because the public schools where I grew up were at least decent, I think they were probably better than that at the time, I have a great gratitude to the most noble aspect of this noble republic that we get the privilege of waking up in. And it is in spite of our pluralism that we make a commitment on the American left, on the American right, in the American center to giving every child equal opportunity. And we're not doing that anymore. We have had chapters in our history when we didn't do that intentionally because of the color of people's skin or because of their religion. I can say that as a Catholic. My grandfather felt that in Louisiana, of all places. And so there are those checkered parts of our history. But the point is now we're not doing it intentionally. And I don't use this as hyperbole because of woke politics. It's really getting in the way. But even to sum up here, even something longer term, Josh, is that since the late 1970s, we've spent trillions of dollars on government funded schools. And all that's happened as a result is that educational attainment in every ethnic and racial group has gone down. That ought to embarrass and worry Americans. And we at Heritage want to fix that by saying every dollar follow every child to the school of his family's or her family's choice.
That makes a lot of sense. So give us a little bit more explanation on that. And even you had mentioned woke politics, and we've had, people that were proponents of critical race theory that were on our podcast. We've had several professors. We've had people, Lindsay
Burke.
James Lindsay.
Or James Lindsay. Mm-hmm.
No, James Lindsay.
Yep.
Yeah, came on.
He's great too.
Yeah, and he talked, and obviously he's not a proponent of critical race theory. He's very outspoken. Adversary. So, what about woke politics and kind of just going a little bit more about how this education system has failed?
Well, the most important failure, the most significant failure, has been that, and this precedes the advent of critical race theory in curricula, was the commitment toward educating to the least common denominator. And that's really, we saw in terms of educational theory, pedagogy in the 1980s. Keep in mind, I'm a teacher and professor, so this is a world that I know well. And I actually say that with certainly no partisanship. I mean, you have to account for my ideological bias. I'm a lifelong conservative. Sure. But the point is, in the classroom, at least in my classroom, there weren't those boundaries. We just wanted everyone to succeed. And the reality is that if you put a group of 30 people in a room, some are going to be more capable in that subject and some will be less capable. It doesn't mean that any of them are less human or any less important. But what educational theory did was starting in the 70s and 80s was say that you just forget that and everyone will learn the same thing. Well, what that means is you're lopping off the ability of the most capable in these particular subjects of actually attaining what they need to attain. And the beautiful thing about our Lord is, or if someone's an atheist, about nature, is that someone can be really good in one subject and someone could be not really good in another subject. So it has nothing to do with race and ethnicity, or for that matter, even socioeconomics, as you know. It has everything to do with challenging humans to do what we're hardwired to do in our souls, in our nature, and that is achieve our dignity through success, through hard work. And I think, unfortunately, tragically, from this great proponent of public education, me, not only are public schools failing to do that, but they're actually undermining that very thought. And therefore, in the last 5 to 10 years, when critical race theory did become part of K through 12 public school curricula, all the way down to kindergarten, it aggravated that by saying that in spite of immutable characteristics, things we can't change, in the United States, we're going to define everyone according to that, and we're still put them into particular camps where they are either oppressors or oppressed. And I know, as y'all have talked about eloquently, that from our respective experiences, regardless of our ethnic backgrounds, that is an affront to human nature, especially in the United States, because Black kids, brown kids, white kids want to get along in spite of the very imperfect past of the United States. And I think it has just been a double whammy when it comes to doing the thing that our founders and subsequent generations who were advocates of public schools wanted public schools to do, and that is to transmit a cohesiveness among Americans, not a unanimity, but a cohesiveness. And one of the reasons we feel that the social fabric of the United States is being rendered apart almost every day is because of all of these problems in our government-funded schools.
I'm curious on what's your opinion on what an acceptable outcome of a public education is or would be.
Well, an acceptable outcome would be, thinking about ways we might measure this, would be a proficiency, a basic proficiency in all of the major subjects. So when someone is completing 12th grade in the United States, they need to be able to be reading at 12th grade level. If in fact, their nature allows them to do that, 98% of the population would be able to do that. Clearly, some people have special needs and we can address those. Same thing with math, history, science, and so on. We could also measure that with some standardized tests. There are problems with some of those. But the issue, that issue aside, if you look at ACT or SAT, a certain proficiency there, not a dumbing down of those scores. But there's something qualitative. I'm a historian, not an economist. And so I believe in qualitative data as much as quantitative data. And the qualitative data would be that I, as a historian, someone who has taught writing and rhetoric, when I read, say, a 5-paragraph essay of any high school senior in this country, it's generally well written. It shows a depth of having read at least some of the classics, an appreciation for the beauty and tensions inside the American founding. And guys, I say this, it's heartfelt. It is not partisan. I don't even think it's coming from, my conservatism as much as my pride as an American. It's a tragedy that as I sit here, a majority of American 12th graders don't fit in that category.
Well, I mean, maybe if they learn how to use Chat GPT,
definitely if they learn how to use Chat GPT.
I have a conservative friend in the education world who tells me it's the end all be all, and I've gotten old enough where I know what I don't know, and so maybe he's right. You would have to tell it.
I've decided to go ahead and submit in advance to our robotic overlords, and so I'm just like. It's all good. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So I know one of the issues that you're also passionate about is this idea of school choice and vouchers, and I'll be honest and say I don't really know that much about it, but what I do know about it, it doesn't sound like horrible. And I think that, kind of to your point earlier, is that unfortunately, like, our educational system has also become very politicized. So, if you're from my ilk, you're like, oh, well, it's a Republican created thing, so like it's got to be bad, and then like if you're a Republican, you're like, well, anything the liberals say, it's probably got to be bad, but for me personally, I mean, like, so we homeschool our kids, and we're blessed to be able to do that, and I personally believe that our kids are getting a much better education, much one-on-one. Like my kids all of a sudden decide they like Roblox, and then we're like, hey, you want to learn about coding? Yeah, cool. Like, and then we just sort of transition and help them learn things. So like, what are vouchers? What is school choice? Maybe you can kind of, dumb it down for somebody like me.
Well, think you need anything dumbed down, Will. You're very smart, and beyond that, you're also very fair. So I appreciate your question. That your ideological bias would say you don't really want to like school choice and vouchers, and I get that, by the way. And yet there's not much about it that seems wrong, and so I appreciate that. Unfortunately, it's become more of a partisan issue. And I think that I won't belabor that point, but I think both sides bear some blame on that for the typical reasons that we see national campaigns, for example, because of social media, they're able to micro target voters who are going for high propensity. It means that the rhetoric around these really important issues becomes hyper partisan. It need not be when it comes to school choice. And so for members of your audience, for you and your family who are left of center, with all the respect I have for you as human persons and for your position, in spite of our disagreement, that's right. It's not a Republican thing. It's all about kids. And so to get to the basics of it, put the politics off to the side, or the political feasibility of it off to the side. The way it works is you create an account in the state treasurer's office. This is properly done at the state level. And there's an account with either a family's name, or, as it would probably have to be, a child's name. That creates, for you to know, for those of us on the right, some privacy concerns, but keeping in mind that the Treasury knows who we are because we pay taxes, I actually think this is okay. And so whatever amount of money the state is spending per pupil for education, which is on average $17,000 a student, varies from state to state, that money, or a big portion of that money, is placed in that account. And then you as a parent are able to decide if you want to use that 100% of that for private school tuition. You might want to use that. You want to keep your child in a public school and use some of those funds for after school benefits. Some students or parents will use that. This is coming from a homeschooling family too, for a hybrid situation where you'll have your students in class for 3 days, and 2 days you're going to hire a homeschool tutor. This is the point, and this is the thing that's not only not partisan, but I think is very exciting. The mindset that Americans have had from Horace Mann, that quintessential proverbial one-room schoolhouse. We even had enslaved African Americans learning in those kinds of schoolhouses in Virginia, for example. That served us really well for a while. It turned into a little bit larger school in the early 1900s, turned into much bigger schools. In fact, I think most schools are too big because education should be about community. This is the point. That's outdated. And so what school choice does, whether in this form of an education savings account, is give us the mechanism by which we can update the structure, the approach of education. And I know that some teachers get a little nervous when they hear that. My younger brother is a longtime English teacher and football coach in Louisiana. He's right of center, as you might imagine. But, he gets a little nervous when he hears this. But when we talk about this and he understands, oh, I'm going to keep my job, it's just going to look a little bit different because of the freedom that families will have to decide where their kids are going. To sum up here, Will, it's going to have this really important consequence, which has been missing in public classrooms, and that is a greater engagement and involvement by parents. So I actually think it's going to have some downstream social and cultural effects, neither conservative nor liberal, but just really good for young children.
Yeah, I really love that because, if there's, I really enjoy homeschool. I shouldn't say I really enjoy. My wife is the teacher, so I should probably say, I think she really enjoys homeschooling our kids. But for me personally, if I have one big gripe about the homeschool sort of lifestyle is that, we're still paying taxes, on public education, which, sure, taxes, that's just a way of life, right? But we're also paying for all of our own school books, our own curriculum, our own. I don't know what the total is, but I'm sure it's up there. And having sort of money to invest myself into my child's education would be totally amazing. And I'm curious, are there any microcosms of school choice vouchers communities within the country that we can look at and say, yeah, like this is a really good model and it can work?
Man, great question. The answer to that is yes. In Florida, there's a long-running tax credit scholarship program, which is now a decade and a half old. So you can actually look at data. This is what Heritage does, right? We have our ideas about policies, but ultimately we're going to be the umpire and say this has worked or not worked. So the data is very clear there that school choice has not only helped the participants in that program, but very interestingly, considering the common objection by some left of center friends, which is that you're taking money out of the public schools, you're going to harm them, that quote unquote competition actually causes an improvement in the public schools nearby. And so my colleague Jay Green at Heritage, PhD in education policy, statistician, economist, has proven this time and again. Also in Tennessee, but most profoundly in Arizona, which has been the leader in school choice for the last 2 decades, first with charter schools and now with universal school choice. There's data, very clear data that shows that school choice has benefited not only the participants, but schools in our students in public schools writ large. I'm happy to say as a postscript that this year, 2023, is already the most successful year for universal school choice programs being passed by legislatures. Iowa has done that. Utah has done that. I remain cautiously optimistic that my adopted home state of Texas will do that by May. And the result is, just to speak to friends in your audience who are left of center and skeptical of school choice, is not to be worried that it's going to harm public schools. There's actually no evidence that suggests that. And I don't mean that in a stubborn way, wagging my finger saying, don't you dare believe that. It's a very normal, natural reaction to think, right? But I would encourage them to read the work of my friend and colleague, Jay Green, on that. It would really allay those concerns. And this is what's going to happen by the end of 2020s, Will. People are going to become accustomed to this. They're going to become familiar with it. And they're going to say, we as Americans, left to right, want to continue our commitment to public education. It's just that public education is going to look a little different because it's the 21st century. And I think once Americans are able to grasp that, they're really going to love it. And just as we did in the late 1800s and the 20th century, in spite of the pluralism of the United States, we're going to embrace that as a very specific, noble American objective.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Kevin. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to dig in a little bit more to CRT because I think that that's such a fascinating element in this education debate. Obviously, we've had a lot of tension and a lot of hostility on both sides around this issue. And I just want to take a moment. I want to read the American Bar Association, what they've described CRT, and then I'd love to get kind of your input on the definition and what you think, and then even helping us understand, like, okay, and I'll try to remind you this follow-up, but like, if CRT isn't, which I'm assuming there you're going to come down, right? You've already said if it's not a viable and helpful way of teaching, then how do we talk about some of the more nasty parts and disreputable parts of our history and being honest about them? So let me just read this. This is from the American Bar Association. It says CRT is not a diversity and inclusion training, quote unquote, but a practice of interrogating the role of race and racism in society that emerged in the legal academy and spread to other fields of scholarship. Crenshaw, who coined the term CRT, notes that CRT is not a noun but a verb. It cannot be confined to a static and narrow definition, but is considered to be an evolving and malleable practice. It critiques how the social construction of race and institutionalized racism perpetuate a racial caste system that relegates people of color to the bottom tiers. CRT also recognizes that race intersects with other identities, including sexuality, gender identity, and others. CRT recognizes that racism is not a bygone relic of the past. Instead, it acknowledges that the legacy of slavery, segregation, and the imposition of second-class citizenship on Black Americans and other people of color continue to permeate the social fabric of this nation. So there's a lot in there, but whatever it is that caught your attention or whatever, critique that for us and then help us understand how we talk about the nasty parts of our history in an honest way, but a good way.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Every word of that caught my attention, so you're probably going to have to interrupt me here. Well, let me not bury the lead and say that the most important thing we can do as historians, this is coming from a historian, someone who, in spite of the fact, in case someone's listening, not watching, I am decidedly white. I'm a white guy, but I have a PhD in early African American history because I think it's a beautiful story of struggle and frankly, Christianity, giving people, among other things, the power to persevere through the most egregious treatment that any of us could imagine. And worse still, if something could potentially be worse than not owning oneself, was the nearly century after the ending of slavery that it took for the United States to use the beautiful words of Martin Luther King, deliver on the promissory note. And so from this historian, well before critical race theory was known, well before its preceding elements were working themselves into the classroom, I and most historians were confronting that. And I think we were doing it really well. But the second thing is that definition of critical race theory in the very beginning of the definition makes it sound innocuous, and it's not. Because what critical race theory is the definition of human beings according to characteristics they can't change. And meaning that whatever those characteristics are, in the case of critical race theory, the color of one's skin, that one, regardless of their own individual will, as a Catholic, that bothers me, that we're relegating someone's free will to be controlled by someone else, or because of pursuits that they have, a desire to not engage in groupthink, either as white people or black people or people who are Asian Americans, that they're going to be confined to a particular group, either oppressors or the oppressed. And I use the following word as an academic, not as a political polemic. It's Marxist. And for people in the audience who like Marxism, I'll explain. The problem with Marxism is exactly the same thing. It is, I mean this not to be partisan, not as a conservative, as a philosopher. Marxism has a philosophical problem in its foundation, which is that it's materially deterministic. So in some cases, this is especially true in the Marxist colonial critiques in West Africa, an area I know well academically because of my study of the slave trade. Marxists had a lot of cachet because they said people in West Africa, for example, are relegated to being the oppressed, to being the colonized because of their lack of particular natural resources. Well, go talk to Nigeria today. Go talk to Senegal. They've proven that to be incorrect in spite of the problems of colonialism. The point is this: in the American setting, especially in the setting of, say, a first grade classroom in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which, if, say, in the greater Richmond area, might be slightly majority white, large plurality of African Americans, and a handful of Asian Americans, a handful of Latinos. You're telling that each of those four groups, those kids in those four groups, that they must not ever aspire to what Martin Luther King aspired to doing and inspired the rest of us to do, which is to work together in spite of the sordid past of our history. And you know what? The beautiful thing is, if the three of us walked into that classroom, every single one of those kids would say, we want to get along with our friends. That's the problem with critical race theory. I don't have a problem with critical theory, the larger academic impulse that's been going on since the days of Antonio Gramsci and Michel Foucault, theories I know very well because I was a graduate student at a very liberal university. I don't have a problem with that as an intellectual exercise. It's the application of that intellectual exercise onto real people that's a real problem. But let me sum up with the lead again. Critical race theory is not required in order for us to grapple with the difficult chapters of our past. And some of the rhetoric on the right that has demonized critical race theory is right, and it's correct in its impulse, but it's been insufficient in the rhetoric, which is to say, a lot of center-left Americans hear those critiques and they say, oh, these are people who just want to whitewash history. We on the right have to be a lot better. We have to be a lot more eloquent. We have to be a lot more thoughtful in recognizing that a lot of Americans across the political spectrum, in every kind of ethnic group, want history to be taught correctly. I'm just letting you know, hopefully with a little bit of credibility from this answer about being fair, that critical race theory actually gets in the way of that rather than being the vehicle of doing it.
That is, I love that answer. I'm wondering, as I'm thinking about it, and even the idea of critical race theory being in the schools, and let me just make sure I understand what you said. Is that what you are essentially saying is that there are other viable opportunities and ways, methods to teach about the egregious parts of our past that don't have maybe that don't have the activist element or even the Marxist element, which you said the primary issue with the Marxism is a philosophical critique essentially you had of its determinism, materialistic determinism.
Yes.
So help me understand how it's in. Well, maybe help me understand a little bit more why that is an issue, the determinism, materialistic determinism, and how do we know it's in our schools? Like I've heard people say back and forth, it's not in our schools. It's not in our schools. And some people say it is. And so and James Lindsay, of course, he makes a big deal that it's been in our schools for years and years and decades. And so who do we believe, right? You're supposed to have rules of evidence and rules of logic and everything. Who do we believe when it comes to this stuff? Because I don't want to be a racist and I don't want to be an oppressor. Will already calls me racist all the time. So I gotta prove him wrong. And because I have I have lineage that goes all the way back to Confederacy. Anyway,
in Virginia, the likelihood is great. It's just the nature of genealogy.
Anyway, I've spoken too much, but go ahead. No, I just would love to know more about the determinism and how do we know it's in our schools?
I'm about to give you an amen, Pastor.
Your first one, Josh.
Briefly on determinism, which is important, but your other question I would say is more important because that's going to be what your audience is really concerned about. The problem with determinism as a philosophy is that it prevents the full dignity of the human person. What do I mean by that? If someone is a person of faith, they could be a Christian, Muslim, Buddhist. The following is true. We believe imprinted on our soul is not necessarily success, but the ancient Greeks would call this the desire to succeed. You may not succeed, but you've got this inherent desire to. And what determinism says is because of where you're born, maybe on the coast, maybe in the mountains, you can't do that. Because of the color of your skin, because of your religion, because of your socioeconomics. America has shattered that fallacy about determinism. So that's the problem with it. But to your larger question about, and it's a very good question, by the way, about whether critical race theory exists, it can be hard to spot. And so I'm not denigrating anyone who makes the claim that you can't find it, but there are three areas where it does exist. And I want to be really clear and I want to be very categorical. It exists. The first is, and this would be the easiest place for parents of K through 12 students, both public and private schools, by the way, is that it exists in the curriculum. It exists in textbooks. It exists in civics, social studies textbooks, in grades as low as kindergarten, but commonly beginning in 4th and 5th grade. And I've seen that evolution, having been on curriculum committees and so on over the last 20 years. It's there. Is it that present in every single school district in the United States? No, but it is present in a majority of them. The second is more insidious, and it actually speaks to a larger problem, which is how we train teachers in the United States. Every school of education, every college of education, which is basically required in order to be certified in most states, with the exception of only 3 or 4 colleges of education. everyone has critical race theory as part of its curriculum. And so the teachers who are teaching the teachers, the professors, who themselves are the children of the original purveyors of critical theory in the 1960s, are teaching them. It's just that, and nothing against these teachers. I'm related to some of them. These are smart, good people. And if they're stark raving liberals, I'm still glad they're teaching because it's a great sacrifice. They don't even know that what they're being taught is critical race theory, because in those classrooms is just singular thought. We're not allowing anything to be challenged. So in fact, it's the inverse of your wonderful lead-in question, Josh, of making sure we're not whitewashing history. We have the opposite problem in the United States. We're not even allowing teachers in the classrooms where they're learning to be teachers to ask critical questions of critical race theory. And then the third element, which is not only insidious, I'd say it's outright evil. In almost every public school district in the United States, there are about 20 times as many associate superintendents as there are a superintendent. In fact, the greatest rate of growth in government school spending has definitely been for administrators, not teachers, not instruction-related matter. And it's in those offices where people have the official titles of being in charge of diversity, equity, inclusion, that critical race theory not only exists, but it is being foisted upon principals and teachers and therefore students in ways that are devastating to the dignity of the human person.
Wow, that I feel like we could spend this whole episode talking about CRT because I've got so many questions, but I also have a lot of questions about other stuff too. So I want to sort of shift gears a little bit just to talk about polarization in this country. So as a stark raving liberal,
and I love you.
Probably one thing that I think most political parties can agree on is that it seems like we're really polarized, and part of me kind of takes issue with that, because I think that maybe we're just polarized because we keep saying we're polarized, and the birth of this podcast was hoping to try to break that narrative a little bit. In any other world, like, Josh would be my enemy, right? But I'm curious on how does somebody in your position, President Heritage Foundation, huge conservative think tank, tackle that, if nothing else than just from a selfish point of view to expand your base? Because I read the Heritage Foundation. I think that you guys put out some really, really good stuff, and that and AEI and some of the other think tanks, but I know not everybody is necessarily wired like me, thank God. So how do you help polarization, using your organization within the country?
I love that question, Will. It's really important to us that we at Heritage fulfill our obligation to elevate the discourse in the country. And there's kind of easy answer. In fact, it's almost a cop-out, which I'm not going to use here, but it's the think tank cop-out. So most think tanks, most public policy organizations do really good work, whether they're on the left or the right, because they're taking a really deep dive into a particular issue and offering their solutions to it. What's distinctive about Heritage, it's almost one of a kind in DC at least, is that we don't just do that, but we're actually going and advocating for those solutions. We're spending tens of millions of dollars each year advocating in the offices of congressmen and congresswomen, increasingly in state legislatures, to effect those changes. And what that means is we always have to find ways, whether it's in messaging or putting together political coalitions, to say, in spite of the fact that at Heritage we are stridently conservative, we're cheerfully so we don't demonize people. It's actually something we abhor. We're looking for that common ground. It doesn't mean that our conservative principles will go away. It doesn't mean that our conservative solutions we're proposing will go away. What it means is that equally important to us is the manner by which we get to a point in our worldview that the United States is more conservative. And to the heart of your question, there's no way that happens if we remain as polarized as we are. There is some thinking on the political right, and I understand where this is coming from, that we can just forget the left because the left has gone just too far. Well, in fact, maybe a part of the left has become so radical that I, especially as a faithful Catholic, I don't think the chances are great. But we need to be really careful in understanding that that segment of the left is not the entire left. We have to be able to address the center as well. So hopefully, to sum up here, Will, in the policy solutions we're offering, especially in the media we do, the coalition building we do, we're really, really good at that. We're doing that multiple times every day. It's really important to us.
Yeah, because I often think about, the people that are center left, center right. Like, we actually agree on a lot, probably.
That's right.
I mean, like for instance, like I had a really, really far right friend of mine ask me once, like, well, name one good thing, a Republican or a Democrat's ever done, and I was like, I don't know, and her name escapes me. I was like, the congresswoman in New York who like reauthorized like the 9/11 funding, for the people. I was like, that's a good thing, right? Or Abigail Spanberger trying to keep Congress members from trading. Like, I think that's an issue that most people would probably say, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. So like, I'd imagine it's a delicate balance to advocate for conservative principles without vilifying your enemy, but yet that's just what we see so often, both from politicians and pundits and everybody.
No, it's true, and there are a few examples in Congress of people working together. You mentioned Congresswoman Spanberger. She and my really good friend, who's a strident conservative, Chip Roy of Texas, in the depths of the COVID shutdowns, were able to muscle through the House and ultimately through the Senate a really important bill that kept whole some restaurants that had been, really savaged by the shutdowns. Seemingly small to the rest of us, but actually a pretty big deal, and great evidence of two people, one very liberal, one very conservative, working together. We're seeing evidence of this with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema working, it seems, pretty closely with Speaker McCarthy on the debt ceiling, on the fiscal insanity in the country. And on that point, I actually see really significant agreement. I mean, all the way across the political spectrum, that in spite of what each side wants to prioritize as reasons to spend more, on the left, social programs, on the right, defense, that we really have to get our fiscal house in order because it's affecting how we live as humans. And that's something almost all Americans understand.
Yeah, totally. That makes so much sense. One of the things that I feel like is happening right now is the extremes of left and right are taking over in terms of attention, in terms of national attention, in terms of the airwaves and how much time is spent looking at them, and they're the ones with the loudest microphone, loudest voice, right? So, and as we were just pointing out, people in the middle probably are a lot more in common than if you looked at the media and were to see that. And we had an interesting conversation with a congressman who actually recently passed away, but the congressman, will give me his name one more time.
Donald McEachin.
Donald McEachin. He basically said, yeah, politics is just a reflection of the broader society. We're giving you guys what you want. And or whether you know it or not, or whether you think you want that or not, like it's just reflecting that. So my question is, like, what would you say, like, define for me in broad terms a conservative, and bring in some of that, or like a Republican conservative? What would they believe? What kind of person, like what kind of way would they think? But even like, where is this going in your mind in America? Even maybe the things that concern you about your own house, right? Judgment begins in the house of the Lord. And what is it like? What is it about the Conservative Party or the Republicans that's even a little bit concerning to you as we're moving into the future?
Well, great question. A lot there. I'll try to be succinct because that's yet another question that could take an entire episode. But to the heart of your question, Josh, what is conservatism? Conservatism is a belief, first and foremost, in self-governance. and freedom not in the way that our libertarian friends would determine it, which is the freedom they would say to do whatever we want, but rather the freedom to do what we ought. And you start getting at the heart of conservatism when you realize that that word ought confers a moral obligation to all others that we're living in community with, including liberal friends. And so for conservatives, I would say, especially in the 2020s, revitalizing communities, whether they be large urban areas or rural areas that, frankly, I think have been ravaged also by federal policies, that's first and foremost. And so, for example, at Heritage, we care as much about rehabilitating American civil society as we do about successful policy programs in Congress and in state legislatures. They go hand in hand. What flows out of that rehabilitated community is what is the Catholic principle, and it's largely a Christian principle too, of subsidiarity, leaving to the lowest unit in society, whether it's our nuclear family, our homeowners association, our town council, decisions that they can handle, and therefore leaving appropriately and in a good way to our state government, and in a few cases to our federal government, those decisions that only they can handle because of scale. And so the political program, getting to the second part of your question, that I think is going really well for conservatives right now, is our recognition that while we honor conservative presidents who've come before, especially Ronald Reagan, at Heritage, that's especially so because we kind of came of age as an organization, being the big advisor to Reagan. We honor the policies of President Trump. We certainly respect President Biden and President Obama, but we vehemently disagree with their policies. The point is, we are understanding that in order to get back to that equilibrium of rehabilitating community, we've got to be really forceful, to our way of thinking, about getting the government out of some of the things that it's doing. And so right now, I would say the North Star for that in the conservative movement is what Governor DeSantis has done in Florida, side to side, top to bottom. Not an endorsement. I want to be really clear about that, although I'm very enamored with his leadership just coming from this observer. And so I think that's where conservatism is going. And it leads me to the third part of your question, which is how I might offer a critique of the conservative movement. It's very easy for me, by the way, to offer critiques of the Republican Party. In my job and personally, I'm a conservative first. Heritage will work with a member of any party. So to be really clear, I am speaking about my private life, a lifelong Republican, but I sometimes flirt with not being a registered Republican because I think that the party apparatus sometimes isn't very conservative. I think that everything is about winning elections rather than about the first part of what I talked about, what Heritage cares about, and frankly, which a lot of my left of center friends care about, like right here on my street. We care deeply about some things, including getting along in spite of our political differences. All of that to say, there's a big reckoning that each side of the political spectrum is undergoing. The left is undergoing its own. On the right, I can tell you, because I'm not only part of this, but hopefully helping to lead it, a reckoning about, even though how much we love defense spending, it's got to be more responsible. It's got to be more effective and efficient in order for America to fulfill its moral obligation to the world. But we also have to realize that even though we'll all be confronted with having to reform Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, by 2028, whoever is the president will have to do that. That talking about that in ways we did in the 1990s, the way I did in the 1990s. So I'm, Pastor, taking your spiritual advice here. That's wrong. America, I once again rely on the beautiful words of MLK. We issued a promissory note from the Declaration of Independence, which I think we're largely getting right. We also issued a promissory note in the 1930s with Social Security and the 1960s with Medicare and Medicaid. I happen to think that those get in the way to some extent of human dignity, but we got to take a generation to reform that rather than say, we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and, we'll let you go figure it out. That's not conservatism. And I'm really proud that Heritage has been very consistent about that. We will be even more thoughtful because of the delicate nature of those conversations.
That's really cool. So just kind of wrapping up, this would be our last question, but I'm very sensitive to your position and your views about political candidates. So I'm curious if you have any predictions, about how the presidential primaries in 2024 will go. You can kind of just talk high level,
Sure.
Fears, concerns, hopes. I mean, obviously you hope that a Republican wins.
No,
but...
yeah, I hope a conservative wins. And I look forward to the day that maybe the Democrat Party is more conservative, but it's likely that, for the time being, the case will be that conservatives are connected to the Republican Party. Heritage and I are friends with every major conservative aspirant to the White House, including the former president, whom we're very grateful for. There's going to be a wide open primary on the Republican side. I think you're going to have at least a half dozen candidates running by June. I think all of them you think are entering are entering. I happen to know that in a couple of cases, but we'll keep those conversations confidential. And the great thing for us at Heritage is that given our friendship with each, whoever the nominee is, we will have the opportunity to offer them, and the Democrat nominee, by the way, if they would listen to us, policy prescriptions. And then whoever wins, if it happens to be the conservative, we've set up this Project 2025, which is basically an administration in waiting. If the president-elect chooses to use that, it'll be up to him or her. But I think the way this will go is, to put it succinctly, Trumpism, which is a more populist conservatism that has a greater willingness to wield the levers of power, is going to be alive and well, even if President Trump happens not to be the nominee. And you see that in governorships like Ron DeSantis's, in governorships to some extent like Greg Abbott's. Governor Abbott is a good friend. There's a little more tentative. He's a little more reticent than DeSantis. Some of us on the right are encouraging him to be even bolder. We're seeing that with universal school choice call he made last week, seeing that with some of the great things he's done on the border. But some voters really like the fact that he's a little more pensive and thoughtful. That actually appeals tremendously to people in the center and to women. So it's not that that's bad as much as, I'm a middle-aged white guy. I want to go charge the hill. But the point is, whoever the nominee is, I can tell you as someone who's often called one of the leaders of the conservative movement, they will have to ideologically, very genuinely and faithfully represent the things that Trump taught us, which is, as we like to say on the political right, we know what time it is in America. And we have a very narrow path ahead to reclaim the country. By that, I certainly don't mean any violence. I mean reclaiming institutions through which the left has marched and taken them from us.
That's really awesome, and I'm really looking forward to the 2024 primary season. And as a liberal, I've gone on record by saying I don't think Biden should run again, but nobody listens to me, so
we need to change that.
I'd be shocked, but they might do it.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Kevin, for your time. This has been a really awesome conversation. I swear I could just pick your brain forever. So we may have to have you back on the show again. But
awesome.
But yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing at Heritage, and and we'll leave it there.
Well, Will and Josh, thanks so much. We look forward to doing this again, maybe even having you at Heritage. We are big on civil discourse, and you guys do that so well. So thanks so much for having me.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And to our listeners and viewers, we will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.